Welcome to the Off the Fritz podcast, honest conversations that explore life with intention.
Our podcast is a collection of honest stories and conversations with people who have learned and are continuing to learn to live with direction and intention, even when life gets crazy.
Our hope is that this podcast will inspire you and provide you the tools to start living with more intention and a sense of possibility and purpose.
Hey everybody, welcome to our conversation with Christine Platt. I need to be honest, this was definitely one of my favorite conversations that we had on the podcast.
It was fantastic, yeah.
It was awesome. I met Christine through Instagram. I'm a big fan of hers and just admire the work that she's doing. She is such an educated, honestly inspiring woman. I'm just gonna read her bio because I would never be able to capture all of this. So Christine Platt is a modern day Renaissance woman who is known as the Afrominimalist. She holds a BA in Africana Studies, MA in African American Studies, and a JD in General Law. An award-winning author of over 24 literary works. Christine's most recent book, The Afrominimalist Guide to Living with Less, is a radical re-envisioning of minimalism that focuses on authenticity over aesthetics, a resource for anyone seeking to discover the truth behind their overconsumption, as well as how to let go of what no longer serves them. And Christine is one of the warmest, welcoming. Talking to her is like a hug.
Yeah, no, it was awesome because like she's obviously super smart. Mm-hmm. She's like known, she's like famous, and she's also super nice and just easy to talk with and like fun to talk with and like profound in moments. And I mean, I love the conversation. I love how she was trying to keep us on task. Yeah. And how we're like, no, don't. Let's just talk about what you want to talk about. And I mean, she mentioned after the fact how it's like giving interviews all the time and they seem to be the same, but like just being allowed to talk about what you're passionate about kind of allows for something new and different. And so maybe if you've heard her in a conversation or interviewed before, like maybe this one will be a little bit different to you because you probably haven't heard her talk about what she kind of wanted to touch on today and what we ended up touching on. And so I think that's kind of fun to get into just a different side of a person who has a public persona.
Totally.
And yeah, she was wonderful.
So our conversation starts with a real good deep dive into minimalism, but where it landed is that Christine is now an empty nester. Nala is off to university at Penn State, and she tells us the journey and the story of becoming an empty nester. And it was just, she had so much rich wisdom and advice to give Kev and I, who are in the thick of raising 4 monkeys. And so it was just, for us, it's an episode that I will listen. I gleaned a lot of information from it and wisdom. So thanks, Christine.
Yeah, we all got a little bit smarter after that conversation, so that's nice too.
So enjoy.
Anyway, here we go.
Well, Christine, thank you so much for joining us and being willing to be a guest on our podcast. You are someone that I met on Instagram, and I just had this immediate connection with the authenticity and the genuineness of your Instagram page. And you're just incredibly beautiful, and you have this light that just pours out of you. And I came into Instagram and your journey where you were getting ready. Your daughter was about to leave off for college. And so I'm watching this mom go through this transition, and you had written a book, but it wasn't released yet. So I'm watching the anticipation of this book and just, really just getting into your story. And honestly, like I felt like I would tell Kev, like, Kev, I just feel like my friend Christine.
I know.
It's funny how.
Same. No, same. Yeah, it was such a wild time. And I think, a lot of people have like social media, and I really think it's like finding your right little community. Like I love it. I've met so many amazing folks, especially in the minimalist tiny home community. And I remember coming across, I think I came across you guys because it was a Domino feature, like a Domino mag feature. And I just remember being like, look at this. Was it Domino?
You guys were.
It's well.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, sorry, they all start to run. Sorry, Domino. Sorry, Dwell. I remember coming across, this feature and being like, this is the most elegant tiny home I have ever seen. And I went to follow you all, and I'm just like scrolling and liking. And then, when you have that moment where you're like, I am going to look absolutely insane. Let me just stop liking everything. But it was just so beautiful. And I just remember being like, wow, like what a beautiful family. What a beautiful company that, I mean, you could just see the love and, you know, just connection that you have with making these tiny homes and the folks that you're making them for. And I just remember saying, like, when I get a tiny house, they are going to make my tiny house. They're going to build it. I was so excited. So yes, I feel like your friend too.
That's so beautiful,
Cool.
so fun.
You guys are so cute.
Hey, it just shows that there is that real side of social media, and that's the beautiful side that I choose to be a part of. And I think you just need to approach anything in life, especially media and the consumption there, just super intentionally. And it's like, if the people you're following are not serving you well, if it's not serving your perspectives well, it's like you are in charge of the follow and unfollow button.
Yeah.
Total control. I tell people that all the time, right? It's like, I don't feel I follow anyone. And, you know, I could probably have a lot more followers, but I don't follow back, right? I don't follow or follow back if it's not authentic. And I think it's also, if you really want to cultivate these relationships, like, you know, we're friends now, right? You too, Kev. You're part of this. You're part of this. I think if you really want to cultivate those relationships, like, I can't cultivate 10,000 relationships.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, but I can cultivate a good few hundred, right? Like, just on the social media side of things. So yeah, I'm all about, you know, being super authentic and intentional when it comes to everything in my life, including social media. So really glad I found you all and your beautiful family. I love your stories. A lot of fun.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I just wrapped up listening to your book, and I found it fascinating. And you brought such a beautiful perspective to minimalism, and a perspective that I have found absolutely refreshing. So for Kevin and I, our journey to even our tiny home company is so new. Like, we started our company in January of 2020, and have jumped. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I thought you guys have been around forever. Wow.
Well, we have been around forever, but our company, of course, is.
Yeah. The tiny home that you saw, Christine, was our first tiny house.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So we're jumping in and diving in and really getting to know so many people within the tiny home minimalism community. Yeah. And number one, found the best people around, like the
best.
Yeah.
The most encouraging, affirming, supportive, like,
There, I know exactly what you're saying. And it's so funny because I know that mainstream minimalism sort of, you know, it looks very whitewashed, right? Literally and figuratively, right? And I tell people all the time, like, the tiny home minimalist community is like one of the most inclusive communities I've met people from all walks of life, from every race, every nationality, every type of family dynamic, right? But for some reason, we are just presented, or we have in our minds this idea that, you know, minimalism is just for white folks, and it's not. And so it's been really wonderful, you know, writing this book and seeing people from all walks of life really have an opportunity to embrace and look at minimalism in a different way, right? Looking beyond the aesthetics of it and like more as a practice, you know?
Can I want to ask you to do something for me, because I didn't get a chance to listen to your book. And I honestly really want to understand where you're coming from. And I want to understand it, I guess. Like I said to you before we started, I feel like I'm going to say something that's totally ignorant and like kind of dumb. And I'm okay with that, actually, right? I'm totally okay with that.
You will not be. I promise you, you can say whatever you want.
So do this for me. Can you give me a very brief definition of maybe mainstream minimalism, and then maybe just a few talking points on like how you feel you approach minimalism maybe differently than that? Because then I feel like that, to me, I can now be like, okay, now let's talk. You know?
For sure. And I should also say, like, let's not be afraid to talk about race and these things. Like, these are not dirty words. And you don't have to. Yeah. I also serve as the managing director of the Anti-Racist Research and Policy at American University. So there isn't anything that I have not been asked or had to address. Okay.
Fair enough. Thank you.
So mainstream minimalism is really the minimalism that we see on television, what we see on Pinterest, right? It's these perfectly curated squares or images that are just, very monochrome, very barren. If there is a chair in the room, it's a $10,000 chair, right? So it's out of touch and out of reach for a lot of people. But as you all know, that is not the reality that most minimalists or people who live with less, that's really not the lives that they live. And so my approach is Afrominimalism, which is for me, a minimalist life influenced by the African diaspora. But for someone else, it is really just learning how to live with less your way. So what I try to do is give people permission to figure out what minimalism should look like for them. Really understanding the psychology of ownership, right? I've had so many people say, oh my goodness, like I picked up your book and I thought I was going to be able to start decluttering right away. And they were like, I never thought about the why behind why I have things, right? Or thought about like, why am I attached to certain things? So that's the first part for me, because I feel like what we see, in mainstream minimalism, especially on television, right, is this, you go in, you declutter. No one ever talks about how long it really takes, right? So there's this perception that it has to happen in a weekend. Impossible. Do not do that to yourself, folks, right? So there's this perception that it has to happen in a weekend. No one ever talks about forgiveness, which I feel like is a really big part of this process, especially depending how long you've been an overconsumer, right? So, and
do you mean forgiveness? Do you mean forgiveness
forgiving
like yourself for being an overconsumer? Okay.
Yeah, forgiving yourself, but also forgiving others, right? Because what happens when we start to do this inner work is we start to realize and start to pinpoint, like, I remember my mom taking me shopping all the time, right? Or I remember my grandmother saying, live for tomorrow, spend all your money because tomorrow isn't promised, right? And so you start to sort of realize how you establish some of these habits and behaviors. And so I think forgiveness and, forgiving yourself for what you've spent, right? Folks say like, oh my goodness, like I wasted so much. No, you spent so much money. You made some choices and decisions that you now no longer, have to make, right? Like you can make some different choices. So language is really important there. And then when it comes to the letting go piece, we never see what happens to the stuff, which is a big piece for me, right? And so I'm like, let's really also talk about ways to pay it forward with those things that no longer serve us beyond thrift stores and definitely beyond landfills, right? Or throwing things in the trash. And so I think it gives people just a more holistic approach to the practice as opposed to like, here's how you declutter and fold, right? Like, trust me, Marie Kondo, the minimalist, like all these folks, they're gateways to this practice, right?
Sure.
For so many of us. But it's also like, taking the bits and pieces that work for you, right? So I KonMari my closet literally every season, but the one part of her work that I just does not work for me is I am not a folder. I don't fold anything. One thing that I discovered about myself is that if I have dressers and drawers or baskets and bins, anything with a lid, anything that I can have it out of sight, that is not a good solution for me. So I don't have a dresser, right? And so that part of her work doesn't work for me, but there are other parts that speak to me and are helpful to me, right? And so like really getting people to have a holistic approach to a practice in a way to live with less in a way that works for them. I hope that answers your question, Kevin.
It does. And actually, I can tell you, I love the way you're talking right now because Heather gives me trouble all the time because like it's like I feel like we live on these like multiple planes and it's like, well, here's what's happening, and it's like really on the nose, and I find that boring. I kind of want to be like, okay, well that's one level, but there's like a deeper level, and that level is fun to me. It's maybe less known and there's more room for nuance and more room for just depth, I suppose. I like to live there a lot, and so I love to hear that when it's like, well, it's not just about organization or whatever. It's about a way of seeing the world, right? So
Yeah, and I tell people all the time, like it's also so much more than your things, right? And I'm sure it's
Oh,
the
yeah.
same with the tiny house, right? Like you're not just getting a tiny house because you just want a tiny house, right? There's something that you're searching for and looking for and longing for that has drawn you to that, right? So like get to the root causes of that, because otherwise when you make decisions based on pictures, based on someone else's ideals, it ends up usually sucking pretty bad, which is what happened to me. Right? I did the
yeah,
whole like, I am going to have the perfect Pinterest minimalist house, right? And everything was white and barren. And it was just,
right.
and I was like, this is so miserable. I hate it. And I was like, wait, who told me? What are all these unofficial rules of minimalism that people are
Right.
following,
Oh,
you know?
you and I will get along quite well, I think.
Well, that comes to like our approach to tiny home design. It's like we don't want to create the same thing over and over and over
Yeah.
again. We never want to hand the keys over to somebody, to a home that is not perfectly suited to them.
It's like it's their keys when we give it to them. It's
Yeah.
been their keys for the
Yeah.
months that we've been building it, and before we ever,
Yeah.
pounded a single nail, they already knew it was
Yeah.
their home because it's.
And there's something so powerful in that though, right? Like I think when you understand the benefits of minimalism, when you understand the benefits of tiny home living, right? Like you want people to fully experience those benefits, and unless it is a practice or a home that is curated to a lifestyle that works for them, it's not going to work.
Yes.
And they're going to be like, I hate minimalism. I hate my
Right.
tiny house. Well, yeah, because it's mirrored after somebody else's ideals and vision, right? Like what is going to work for you?
Well, and I think it has to be taken one step further in the whether it be the design or the decision-making process. Like, what's the goal here? Is the goal to get a minimalist tiny home, or is that a way to achieve your goals, right? So we can't
Exactly.
end at the home. We start at the home in a sense,
Yep.
and we end with what is your life? What do you want your life to
Yeah.
be? And that's where we end. And that's
Yeah.
how I feel like if you end at the home, it isn't going to work. It's
It
just
never
not going
works.
to work, right?
It's the same with minimalism, right? I tell people, they're like, I just want to have a tidy house. I want to have a tidy closet. I'm like, it is so much more, right?
Yeah.
Like this is just one particular aspect and benefit that you're going to experience. But if you're going into this, like just seeking to tidy up your home, you are going to be very disappointed.
Yeah.
And you know, there's some work that has to be done with all of this, right? And so many people, I feel like they want that outer work. They want the tidy home, they want the organized closet, they want, you know, the perfect tiny house, but it's like they don't want to do the inner work to get to what that is, right? To like, what life are you trying to actually build with this tiny
Right.
house? What are you
Right.
trying to achieve with living with less? Like, what are your other goals besides just these tidy things? You know, Heather,
Right.
I think you're going to say something. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I love that. No, like I love that your book is called a guide, because as I listened to it, it was truly that. Like you gently take us through with such gentleness and compassion, this idea of guiding you towards what is the life that you want to live.
What are you trying to do here, people? Like, what? It's really that simple.
Yeah.
I'm so happy that you said it was gentle, because I have had some people, and I think these are the folks who are like, they picked up the book thinking they were about to declutter, and they're like, I was not ready for that subtle dragging that happened there. Like, you know, you really, really stepped on my toes here. So sometimes my voice is gentle and the delivery is gentle, but sometimes it's hard for people to receive that message. But I have had, everyone has said they're so grateful, because it is something that we just don't talk about or even think about in our own personal lives, you know?
Totally. Well, you consistently ask us to turn in and turn into the why. And in life in general, that's where we need to go, whether or not you're going towards minimalism or wherever you're going. It's knowing, why are you doing what you do? Why did I buy what I bought? Why did I choose to spend my time this weekend, or my perspective on my time and that sort of thing? Because Kevin and I, well, you know, you see us, we have 4 kids, we live a full life. I we think we're like maximalists.
I said I'm like a maximalist, but I think in a way that maybe you might appreciate it. It's not a contrary term to the minimalism that you're speaking of, though, right?
But a lot of it for us is choosing the life that we want to live, and choosing to fill our life with our kids and family and outdoors
and experiences.
and
I
experience.
love that
Community.
you guys focus so much on experiences, and I think it's
Yeah.
just so wonderful for our children, right? You know, and it's so funny to think about me calling myself the Afro minimalist, or even the word minimalist, which I think evokes so much, like lack and scarcity for people, right? And I always say, like, had I known then when I started my journey what I know now, I probably would have called myself like the Afro intentionalist, which is even more of a mouthful than the Afro.
Yeah.
I love that.
But I feel like that's really what this is about, right? And I tell people all the time, for me, it started with minimalism and like wanting to live with less and tame my closet and do all these things. And what I found, Heather, was exactly what you were just talking about, which is minimalism for me has been intention. That's really what it is, right? Like being intentional with what I buy, being intentional about what I accept into my home, being intentional about my time and relationship building, right? Like there's no way that you can just be intentional with your home decor or your wardrobe and like not have the feelings of intentionality trickle into every area of your life,
Yeah.
Right.
And I love that you do it with also a clear intentionality of your culture and your heritage. And that has just brought a lot of joy to my life watching. And I see it through what you have chosen in your home, because I'm drawn to the color. I'm drawn to the vibrancy. I'm drawn to the artifacts that you choose to keep. And I even like the planters that you posted a couple weeks ago with your
thank
plants.
you. Aren't they
they're
gorgeous?
so beautiful. They're gorgeous. and I love them because you celebrate who you are and who has gone before you. And I think there's the celebration of family and lineage is such an intentional thing.
And it's something that shouldn't be weaved out of our homes and our wardrobes and all of those things, right? And what's so interesting is, of course, I speak to, Black folks, people of the African diaspora. So many people from other walks of life say to me, like, I never thought about ways that I could incorporate my Jewish ancestry, right? I never thought about ways that I could incorporate, what my great grandmother left me from Cuba, right? Like all of these things that are they're such important parts of our lives and our identity and who we are, right? And then we look at, again, this mainstream minimalism aesthetic, and it's like, but it doesn't really fit there, right? Which is what happened to me, which is why I thought I had to invent my own type of minimalism, right? I'm like, I have to call it Afrominimalism because this minimalism does not work for my life, right?
Well, and I feel like as people who are, especially people who are living with intention and I guess paying attention and driving themselves forwards to a certain way of being, I feel like we kind of build our own cultures, like our own individual little cultures, right? And so it's funny because we've just been discussing this recently because we have parties like every weekend with our friends, and all the kids come over, and we put all the kids to bed, and we make great food, and we hang out and we drink and tell stories and laugh. And we're realizing, it just struck me like maybe a few weeks ago, it's like, this is what our kids know. Like this is what they know, that most Fridays or Saturdays, everybody's going to come over. We're all going to play. The parents are going to ignore us for a little bit, and we're going to do whatever we want. And then they're going to struggle to get us to bed, and then we're going to get taken home in the middle of the night, woken up and driven home. And like that's like this is the culture that we've built. This is like our Fritz umbrella with all our little inside community. And it struck us as like, oh, this isn't just something we've done a few times. This is who we are and what we do.
And they'll never forget it. They'll never forget it. Like what we call that in my community, call it the village, right? And so what you have established a village. And, I think, especially in terms of like parenting, having a village is essential, right? And so from everything, I mean, my village, there's no way that my daughter would be as well-rounded and successful as she is today without my village, right? Like, yes, there are individual aspects of parenting that are, that the bulk of that will be ours. But I think we underestimate the power and necessity of community. And my daughter and her friends, the village raised them. They all went, like they're all on their way, either in college or on their way to college. And I just remember like hearing you talk about the sleepovers. Like I remember our home being home base, right? And it was so fun, and the stories and the pictures, right? And it's a really beautiful thing for our children to have. And it also helps, during those tough parenting times, right? Heather, I talk a lot about motherhood on my platform. And it's because I think when you're in the midst, when your children are younger, right, you say certain things and people are like, oh, how could you say that? Even though they're probably all thinking it, right? Like, I'm exhausted, I'm tired. This is not what I signed up for, right? Like all of those things. But there is a certain sort of deference that is given when you have, been through the gamut and raised your kids and they came out successful, right? Like parents want to hear, how'd you do that? How'd you do that? What'd you do? Right. And I feel like it's so important for us to talk about like what parenting really entails, the hard times, and it's been interesting for me to reflect on. And I love just seeing, families like yours, like really building that community, making those memories, right? Because I can assure you, it felt like my daughter was 2 years old yesterday. Like part of my, like the first few weeks after dropping her off from school, like literally I had to just cancel everything. And I had just sat there and I was like, how have 18 years passed? How? Yeah. How have 18 years passed, right? And so you guys are doing the right thing. Just know that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
It's not easy. And especially jumping into starting a business with, we started the business and then the pandemic hit. Oh. And then on top of that, school got canceled.
We were homeschooling.
Here I have in my home, relating mom to mom here. I have now my husband.
Excuse us, Kevin.
Excuse me.
I'll wait. Yeah.
I now have my husband working in our bedroom because we've carved out the home office up in our bedroom. I am now, and trying to figure out how to navigate this and be a support there. And I'm helping to develop the company. I'm stepping into my businesswoman shoes. And then my kids are home and I'm homeschooling them. And it's also new in the midst of the uncertainty of like, wow, this is unprecedented times.
Surreal. It was surreal.
There was times, and I'll be honest, I was yelling and I'm like, why am I yelling? And I'm in the bathroom crying and I closed the door and I texted to Kev upstairs and I'm like, I know you probably have your ear pods in and you can't hear that I am drowning down here and I'm done. And it's just really, really, really hard. But during those seasons, I just learned so much about how we can start and restart as moms and dads and parents, that it's like we can fail in front of them and we can open the bathroom door and come on out and say, hey, this is really hard for me. This is a lot. And this is how I feel. And I'm sorry, that wasn't my best self.
Yeah.
Will you forgive me?
Yeah. And they're so forgiving. That's the first thing. Right. They're so forgiving. And I think it's so important to be honest, right? I think, as parents, we want to have our children in a bubble, right? Like we want them to be in that weekend in your house, having the sleepover and having fun like all the time, right? But we have also raising humans who we hope will become, right, productive, healthy, successful global citizens, right? And so, one of the things, I'll share this with you all just to sort of drive this point home, is I did not grow up seeing conflict resolution. None. It was like, no one is supposed to argue. No one is supposed to cry. No, right? And so when I had to confront those things as adults, I mean, it would be, I'd be dating and the first time me and my boyfriend have an argument, I'm like, oh, clearly this is just not going to work out. Right? Right? And they would be like, what are you talking about? And I would be like, no, I don't argue. I don't do this, right? And so like you have to remember, like, we want to show our children the reality of a full life, right? And I think they learn so much, as you said, Heather, by seeing us try and fail. They learn so much by us being honest, right? They learn so much by the way we live our lives, right? I mean, even in the short window, I started my minimalist journey 5 years ago. And just in those 5 years, the transformation it made in my daughter, unbelievable. I literally, we were, when I dropped her off and we're getting her settled, me and her dad were like, do you need anything? And she's like, no, I don't think so. We're like, pens, paper. Oh yeah, pens, right? Like she's so but I have 2 pens, but I'm like, I think you might need more in college. You know what I mean? But they become so conditioned to the lives that we show them. And what I showed her was like, you don't need a lot of things to be happy, right? It's not about the things. And even our space, I mean, we went from a very large home that was on, acreage that was actually zoned rural. That's how much space we had, to being in a 630 square foot condo in the city, right? And I remember thinking, like, what have I done, right? And now here we are, and I'm like, do we really need 630 square feet? Like, this is a lot of space, right?
So not only did you journey that yourself, but you also journeyed that with your daughter. And I think that's incredibly beautiful, because it's through those times when we do stuff together as a family that so many of those life lessons can get taught.
Well, I love that you kept saying the word show, and not tell.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's obviously there's a lot of teaching that can be told, but there's no more effective teaching than saying, no, I'm doing this. I'm going to show you that this countercultural narrative is okay, that it's like, we don't need the latest, greatest, best, most, right?
And
that's believable because you proved it.
It's believable because you proved it, as you said, right? Like seeing your parents cry and then the next morning they're fine lets you know it's okay to cry, right? Seeing your parents argue and the next morning seeing them hug lets you know that, like, okay, there can be resolution. It doesn't mean they don't love each other. It doesn't mean, right? Like the more that we can show those things, like that is what really builds, healthy dynamics. And in 18 years, it will pass very, very quick. Trust me.
Well, and I think that creating that little bubble, that safe space for your children where they don't have to deal with any of this, and just give them this beautiful little childhood that doesn't have any of those hardships in it. I think that that's raising maybe great children. But I always say we're not raising children. They're children for 18 short years. We're raising grown-ups. And it's like, what's going to happen when we're not protecting them and when we're not buffering and hiding that from them? It's like, because the world's not going to protect them from anything.
They're not. I really encourage parents to like let that air out of the bubble just as slowly as is comfortable for you, right? And oftentimes, like, we don't have the luxury that our parents had. Right? When it comes to certain, I mean, like, this is going to be so embarrassing, but I thought the stork, brought babies for a really long time. Like,
what do you mean? It doesn't?
Right?
I'm confused.
Sorry to burst your bubble there, y'all. But, and I remember, my daughter asking me that question, and then, like, my inclination was to tell what was told to me. And then I was like, but now there's Google.
Right.
So, there's certain things now that we don't have the liberty of not being honest about, right? So I'm always like, age-appropriate conversations that can be built upon over time, right? Age-appropriate conversations, honest conversations that can be built upon over time, right? And that is how you build trust, because I'm telling you, and I know this is not like a parenting podcast, folks, but
it's whatever we want it to be.
I think it's headed a beautiful direction.
Yes, we're off the fritz here, right?
Yeah, that's right. We'll talk about whatever we want. Nobody's telling us what to do.
But like these things are, it's so important because, once that trust is broken, it's really hard to get back, right? So if I start lying to you at 5 about where babies come from, I don't need to tell you exactly where babies come from, right? But I don't have to tell you the stork.
Right.
That's not
Yeah.
tell you the truth, right? And so you go to school and you're like, oh, the stork brings babies, and your friend is like, what? No, they don't.
Yeah.
You know, and you're like Googling, and like the trust is broken, right? And you just, it's so important that I cannot stress to you enough, especially as your kids get older, how important that trust is.
Well, bookended by birth and death, there's a lot of potentially uncomfortable conversations when it comes to that.
Oh, yeah.
And honestly, we've been super grateful for animals in our life because it has been such an incredible tool for those conversations. And we're dealing with some health issues in our family right now, which is going to lead to death. And it's like, how do we deal with this? We talked about it. Like, how do we deal with this? It's like, we tell them.
Yeah.
We tell them that this is how the world works. And it's like, if everything goes according to plan, you're going to watch your grandparents die. And if it goes according to plan, you're going to watch us die. Yeah. And if something goes poorly, that's the only way that won't happen. And so for kids to come to grips with that before they're slapped with it, because they will be slapped with it, right?
It's inevitable. And that's what Kevin, that's the exact thing, right? It's like trying to shield someone from the inevitable, like even saying that aloud, it doesn't make sense. Why am I trying to? It's so selfish. And, this conversation, it comes up in so many different aspects, right? Like we're talking about death. It comes up in conversations about racism, right? I have parents, they're like, what do I say? How do I say it? What, and it's like, but what if I say this? And then they ask me this and I don't have the answer. And I'm like, then say you don't have the answer, right? But it's that selfishness that's like, I don't want to be confronted with something that I'm uncomfortable talking about or that I'm not ready to talk about, right? And it just does a huge disservice, right? And again, it's okay to tell your kids, I don't know, this is tough. I never had to deal with this growing up, right? It's okay to be honest.
Your job, responsibility, role as a parent is way more important than that discomfort, I suppose.
Way more. How have they been? Have they been helpful with you all with like the business? Do they want to like get hands-on? How has that been?
It has been from here to here, if I haven't left the screen. There's honestly, there's a bit of, the honest truth is, especially with our second boy, who is very thoughtful, there's been like almost a bit of animosity at times because he's watching me work for the first time because I've always gone away to work and I disappear and then I come home. Now he's watching me work, and so I'm there in the same space as him, but I'm not paying attention to him. I'm working. And so honestly, there's been at times like he's told me, and he's been honest about it, which has been really cool because he's 8. And he's been honest with Heather about it too. And he's like, why do you guys do this all the time? I wish you'd spend more time with me. And that's hard, honestly.
Well, I've had Mommy, I hate your phone. Mom, just get off your phone. And I just had to be like, Bud, like, I need to let you know, like, I told you, like, this is the time that Mommy's working right now. And Mommy's work is on my phone. Can I show you? This is what Instagram looks like. This is what Mommy's doing. See all these? Mommy's talking to those people. And this lady here, she has questions about the tiny house. And I think sometimes when we are able to frame it in that way, I'm trying to help them to understand the greater picture of what we're doing. And right now, where the reasons we chose to do this business is for them and for the
it's for both of us.
It's for both of us.
And we want them to understand both of those things. In all honesty, we want them to understand it's like, no, Mom and Dad are doing this because it makes us happy and it makes us fulfilled. That's important for you to know and be okay with. We're also doing this.
Oh, sorry. You're like hitting. I'm sorry for interrupting, but you were just like hitting.
It's okay.
Buttons because it's the younger our children learn that the world does not revolve around the better, right? Like,
right.
I went through this. So before I became an author Heather, you got a chance to listen to this in the book, but Kevin, what you don't know is that before I began my minimalist journey, I was a lawyer, right? And working in a very big city, in very large firms with very demanding hours. And it was awful, right? Like I would that my daughter would have to come into work with me on the weekends, right? And she would be a toddler. And I remember those little portable DVD players. I'd like set her up in my office with the little portable, and I'm like looking outside the window. The sun is, shining. Of course, that is the exact moment in time when every parent and their kid starts playing outside, right? And so it's terrible that my daughter's been out there. And you know what is so wild? Like what I didn't realize I was teaching her at the time was like work ethic, right? Yeah. Like if I have to really, this is my job and this is what I've chosen to do, right? Now, what she got to see when she was older is this no longer works for me and this is what I no longer want to do. And here's how you pivot successfully, right? So like there's all these things that you don't even know that you're showing your children, Kevin and Heather, like you don't even realize that you're showing them that. And I think it's so important for them to understand the world does not revolve around them and their needs, right? Like you can, they have the weekend with you all with this major slumber party, right? Like you can set aside an hour a day, right? And I used to build in all sorts of little buffers for myself because work is, it can be challenging, right? And I remember I used to have this thing where when we would come in, and this is like, I can't express to you how exhausting big law is and billing your time and it was just so much, right? And I would have to come home and I just needed a moment, right? I would put this little scarf on my door and Nala knew whenever that scarf was on mommy's door, like, don't ask me anything. Don't come looking for me. Don't, right? I just had like this whole laundry list. And one day, one of my friends came over and it was the way that I called Nala's name. And it must have been the same way that I called her name after those long days. And she said, and she's like, 4, I know. Don't come looking for you. Don't ask you for anything. And I was just like, oh no. Right? But what's so has no memories of sitting under my desk. She has no memories of that scarf on the door. But
she has lessons learned from it though.
So many lessons, right? And if I like bring it up to her, I'll be like, you don't remember? She'll be like, oh yeah, right? But it's not at the forefront of her mind. No. What she remembers is how much fun we had together, right? Like even she was like, I just remember going to work with you on the weekends and after we would get ice cream. Like they don't, so much of what we're taking in and what we think they're holding on to, those are our own insecurities or our own sort of like, we feel bad that mom, I don't know about dad guilt, but mom guilt is a real
It's a real thing. Right? I've heard all about it. Yeah.
A real thing, right? And but at the end of the day, like the gift and legacy that you're leaving them, showing them what it means to live out your dreams and to, build homes for, like there's so many lessons that are being taught there. So if I can just offer any encouragement, especially Heather, because I know the mom guilt, Kevin, I can't speak to the dad guilt, is to just not be so hard on yourself.
I'm trying to have so much grace on myself in the season and just know that like, hey, we've chosen this new path of life because we want to live from the heart. Yeah. And I told them like, mommy and daddy didn't like our jobs that much. They were draining. And now we're stepping into this thing that we love our jobs, like aspects of our jobs.
Oh, we do love our jobs.
What it is that in life, you can hold in the same hands something that's incredibly beautiful, so full of life and intention and amazingness. And at the same time, it's hard and requires an incredible amount of work and focus. And it doesn't always go easy, and you fall and you fail and you get up and you go again. And all of that's true. So sometimes it's hard to speak to like, like I want to make sure it's all of that is all wrapped up into
one. Which is why that's where showing comes in. Like some things can't be said. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like something shown, right? And so you can say things that reinforce that. But again, if you're not living that and showing that, it's like, the kids who, they're like, what do you mean you're not racist? You are, right? And the parents are like, no, I'm not. And they're like, but what, it's like, what are you living and showing your children? That is what especially the older they get, that is what they are adhering to, not what they're told, what they're shown.
Right. Well, and I love that expansion on that point.
I know.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. But I do want to finish that because we are doing this in a lot of ways for them as well, because our big goal is to build this lifestyle that that we can do the things with them that we want to do. Like, we have 4 kids. It is not easy to do this with 4 kids, right? And we had a dream before we had a single kid. And we had a dream of what we wanted to be as people, as a couple, as individuals, as a couple, and as parents, and as a family. And so we have this dream of this lifestyle we want to build for our children as well. And it's like, you don't get that overnight. It's not given to you. It's earned, right? And so this
Sorry, I was going to say it'll be interesting to see your 8-year-old, how he looks at this in 3 years, in 5 years, right? Like, because that's the other thing, we're we get so siloed in the moment. And just as we change, our kids change, our perspectives on things change, right? And Heather, you know this because I say this in the book. I have this saying, Kevin, that I am not a grown woman. I am a growing woman.
Perfect.
And may I always be growing and never fully grown, right? Because what happens is when we're like, oh, I'm grown, there leaves no room. There's no room for growth. There's no room for making, the wrong choice and making a different choice. There's no room, right? And who wants to go through life fully grown, right? I have to always be growing. And part of that is our kids are doing that as well, right? So I have to check in with you guys. You may have a budding carpenter on your hands that you don't even know.
So the other side, they do love to help, and they do love, and in the bigger end of it, it's awesome watching our oldest boy, Kin, just because he's the oldest now, and he's started playing football. And I've watched him as a football player, and so I tell him what he should do out there. But I realize all these things I didn't tell him that he's just doing. And it's because he's treating football the same way he's watched us treat life. Exactly. And he's working hard. He's the first one to the line. He's, he gets up when it hurts, and on my watch, I'm like, oh, I didn't tell him any of that. But we showed him that. He's learned that through supper time and getting ready for school. And he's learned all that, right? So
and just watching.
It's exciting.
They're just watching.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
I'm definitely going to have to follow up because I want to see how the rest of these guys end up, managing what I think is just a beautiful business and practice that you all have. Not just the way that you live your lives, but the way that you commit to making the perfect home for anyone who comes to you. And I mean, the rain showers, the soaking tub. I have sat there and I've been like, I cannot wait. And then this home with the velvet green sofa, I was oh my God. Yeah. It's so beautiful, right? And I think it speaks to, the work that you all are doing and understanding how I can truly, truly transform lives, which is really powerful.
It's pretty fun. It's pretty fun.
Well, thank you so much for this time.
You're so welcome.
This just feels like a natural. I love how these conversations can just lead to where they lead. And this is so beautiful. I feel like we could have another podcast with you, a discussion, because there's more that we could dig in more into minimalism and all the rest. But this was exactly what it was meant to be. And it was so beautiful.
This was so wonderful.
Can I ask you a question to wrap up our conversation?
Sure.
This can be as light or as deep as you want it to be. What is bringing you joy these days?
This is going to sound so terrible, especially after all the parenting advice I just gave on this episode that was supposed to be about living with less. But I guess this can tie it all back in. What is bringing me joy these days is being an empty nester. It is. Tell me. Woo! It is so magical, right? And part of it is, not what we've been led to believe, right? Which is that, it's going to be just this tragic experience and you're not going to know what to do with yourself, right? And all of these stories that we've been told, what it has been, what's joyous about it for me is reconnecting with the woman I was before I was a mother, right? And figuring out which aspects of that I want to keep. Taking these lessons of resiliency, like what you're learning right now, what every parent is learning right now during the pandemic and having to juggle work and, homeschooling and all of these things, right? Like all of these things are teaching us resiliency and fortitude, right? And like, so there are all those little lessons that I've learned through parenting and thinking like, there's no way I'm going to survive. I remember thinking there's no way I'm going to survive the terrible, like there's no way. And then you look up and you survived, right? And you're like, I can survive anything, right? And so, I think for me, having this time and space right now to just really sit with myself and my feelings, to know that all the sacrifices and decisions that I made as a mother, seeing my daughter happy and healthy and whole in college, it's just a very, very joyous time. And what has been so interesting is when I share those messages online, how many other women are like, oh my goodness, I thought it was going to be terrible, right? And I was like, me too. I thought I was going to cry when I dropped her off at college. And I remember thinking, is something wrong with me? Like, this is so sadistic. Why am I not crying? Because I had been led and conditioned that I was supposed to cry, but her joy was so contagious. It was impossible. Like, it didn't matter how sad I was and that I was going to miss her. It was impossible. And so that's what's bringing me joy these days, is just like really reconnecting with myself, whatever moment feels come, to let them come. It's a beautiful time. It's a beautiful time.
That's awesome.
That's so wonderful. It's cool. It's exciting to embrace the seasons of life, I think, and to go through those and to know life is in seasons. And I think when we anticipate life to be that and give ourselves the freedom to change and to continue to become in each of those seasons is incredibly beautiful. And as you now head into this next phase of your next season, just the beauty that's going to bring as you know yourself more and continue to live so intentionally as you do. Like, you're just so thoughtful in how you spend your time and where you put your energy and effort. And I think that's a huge thing that I've learned from you in the short time that we've learned, is just that you're someone that is very, very thoughtful in that way. And
thank you. Thank you. Yeah. The term empty nest is very interesting. And it's something that psychologists no longer really use. It's actually an outdated term, but we have held on to it. And one of the things that I did, which, there is a moment when you come back from dropping your kids off at school or wherever they end up going, where you are just like, what do I do now, kind of thing. And it's like, I have so much free time. And I remember like looking up, like, where did this like empty nest term come from? And what are like the nesting cycles of birds? This is like so nerd stuff. This is what you do. This is what you're going to do, y'all. And so I'm looking up, and like, I discover that what birds do is what so many humans do, right? Which is, they make, they find a mate, they make a nest, they raise their family in the nest. But do you know what happens that we have not been told? The kids leave the nest, and then so do the birds. The parents
That's
leave the
right.
nest as well, right? And so I'm like, this is almost this natural, this idea, you hear people like, yeah, our kids went off to school and then we sold our house and we did this. And I'm like, we are literally like living a lot of the full life cycles of birds, right? And so it just made me look at empty nesting a little differently and made me say, like, this is why I want my tiny house. It's going to be time to leave this nest soon.
Find a new nest.
Find a new nest. So I can't thank you both enough for this conversation. And I just so look forward to speaking with you all again soon and hopefully working with you all in the near future too.
It's exciting.
It would be incredible.
No, thanks very much. I really enjoyed it. And thanks for not calling me an idiot when I didn't know what.
Oh, no, I would never. I appreciate honesty, and like, communication is so key, and asking those hard questions and having those courageous conversations it's so important. And also something that I'm very intentional about. So you weren't in any harm's way.
Phew, yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome, thanks very much.
Thanks.
That was fun.
Bye.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as we did.
For more on Christine, you can follow her on Instagram at Afrominimalist, and you can read her book, The Afrominimalist Guide to Living with Less. I listened to it and it was awesome. I highly recommend. And if you want to be notified as to when our next podcast launches, then obviously subscribe, click the notification bell, and you can always follow along our journey on Instagram.
Thanks guys.